Chris is the head of strategy at Radish Agency, which is based in the UK, but has kind of offices and presence around the world. They've won a ton of awards, a creative marketing agency for B2B brands. Ones who are looking to stand out, scale up, be known for something memorable rather than just kind of present and pumping out ads on LinkedIn. Chris is going to share how his agency validates their creative ideas using ICP feedback. So why this was important to us is I used to work in agency. Chris and I were chatting about this kind of behind the scenes before we started. And I love how Radish approaches validating with the ICP first before taking their clients' campaigns to market. That was something that I think that was missing from my work when I was in agency life. We didn't go to, our clients' customers and find out if this was going to be marketing that resonates with them, if this is going to be creative that attracts them and draws them in and gets them engaged. So when we saw what Radish was doing, I thought, this would be fantastic to have for our Wynter customers to help better understand how to use this for their own marketing campaigns, their own creative, and et cetera. So without further ado, I'm going to jump off the stage. I'll turn it over to Chris, and I'll be back for when we have some Q&A after he chats. Take it away.
Lovely. Thanks, Eric. Nice to meet everybody. Yeah, I'm Chris Willocks. I head up the strategy team at Radish. We're a London-based agency, specialised really in brand building campaigns and account-based marketing as well. But Eric gave a nice summary there of kind of we really do try to stand for more creativity in the B2B space. I think everybody's sort of seen the sea of same that you tend to see on LinkedIn of B2B work. That tends to be very blue and tends to be lots of people smiling at phones and laptops, and we're trying to change it up a little bit and try to create work that is memorable and really stands out. And today I wanted to talk to you about how we run our creative process and how we use Wynter within that at various different stages. I think the best way to do that is through case studies and examples, and so I've got some bits of creative work to show you and real life for sort of screen grabs of things that we've tested and some feedback from the audience, good or bad, and how we've sort of dealt with it. So hopefully it's a good session for everyone today. Here's a bunch of us radishes, looking a little bit worse for wear after a few champagnes, but this is us winning some awards at the B2B marketing conference, and the one that we're really proud of, which is in there somewhere, is the best use of creative, and it really does kind of reinforce. It's a really kind of competitive category. And we managed to win that, and I think that's testament to us embedding this audience first approach into our process. So I wanted to just touch on the different stages at which we use it, and then kind of why, really, what the benefits we get out of it. So there's three parts really to this. One is the insights phase, so really trying to get the audience voice as early as we possibly can, trying to understand, pain points, priorities, what the big pressing issues, jobs to be done for our audience. And, that used to be a process of several months and quite a lot of money, whereas now we can do that in 24 hours, 48 hours, and get some real fast insights that inform our process. What we like to do is insight based. And then the second piece is using the audience to help us refine the creative options. So we tend to have kind of quite, ideas, low quality sketches, etc., that we take to the audience, and we start to get a feel for what they like, what they don't like, which messages resonate, which don't, which ones have impact, and we have a preference out of the back of that. And then the final piece, which we often do we don't always do the final piece, but we certainly do it when there's going to be a big campaign at the end of it. And one of our clients that we're working with at the moment is got a big sort of £1 million media budget that they want to spend, and it's going to be across out of home and events and digital. And really, we've got to get that ad perfect to make sure that it's right for all those channels. So that's when we spend a bit more time on that final assessment piece and go back to the audience and double check and really get the best out of them. And I think that there's lots of reasons why we do it. One that you might not really expect is, in the B2B world, everybody wants to say in creative. If in the B2C world, marketing looks after creative and they just get on with it. But in the B2B world, you'll find that everybody wants to say. So salespeople, product people, the CEO will want to say. And what we tend to find is that we start with a big bold idea, and as it goes through all these different people, it starts to, everybody chips away at it, and it ends up with something that's quite vanilla at the end of it. and that's obviously no good for anyone. So what we find is if we've got some insights that say this is based on an audience pain point, and we've got some insights that say, and they've seen this ad and they've said it's great for these reasons, it tends to get it through approval rounds a lot quicker. There's evidence to get it through the business, and we tend to end up with less of that sort of deterioration of the idea over rounds of feedback. And I kind of mentioned, it focuses on the audience's main pain points, but audiences have tons of pain points. And I think what's good about it is you can look at what's the priority pain points, what's really red hot right now, and try and center an idea on that. Cultural sensitivity as well is an interesting one. So there's an example recently where we had a product, and one of the core attributes was around flexibility. So we were looking at how do we showcase that in an interesting way, and we'd sort of come up with this idea of contortionists around the office setting, bendy people that were passing various things to each other in sort of strange positions, and one of them was a guy kind of passing a laptop to someone else with his feet, and it flagged up on some of our research that in the Asian market, which is where this was going, that was actually a big no-no, and you don't show people's feet, and it made us sort of pare back from that. So cultural sensitivity is a big one. Feeling more confident about media investment. If you've got £1 or £2 million media spend that's all centering on this one campaign, why wouldn't you make sure that it's going to resonate before you put it into market? And finally, which I think is a big one, is that some of the feedback that we get ends up really tweaking and honing the concepts, the creative concepts. And sometimes, when somebody will say, "Oh, I really like that," and they'll rephrase it in their own words, and we then steal some of their own words because playing back ads in the kind of language that our audience use day to day resonates even more. So audience language is really important as well. So the first example I've got for everybody is in that insights phase, and this is an example of us. One of our clients is a large audit firm based in the US, and they're generally targeting procurement teams in kind of large retail organizations. So they'll be going after people like Walmart in their procurement teams. And this is kind of within Wynter, what the sort of the survey or the insight survey will look like, or certainly the results. So we ask questions like, if you can see that, it's quite small, but what are your top priorities for procurement in the next 12 months? And then you can get people to rank their answers. Then in this case, we were really interested in that relationship between procurement and finance. They're very interlinked, and we wanted to see, what parts of the journey each kind of department gets involved in. But that's an example of kind of some of the more qualitative feedback. And I think the qualitative stuff is really where we like to use Wynter, because you do get really good quality answers. Sometimes if there's surveys going out to hundreds and hundreds of people are doing them very quickly, and the quality of the answers isn't very great. But I think that's a big plus, is the real kind of quality of the answers and the qualitative stuff that we take out of it. But interestingly, one of the insights from this piece was, going into this process, the client, the sales team, everybody we spoke to around the business was like, the only thing that procurement care about is saving money. They're completely obsessed with unlocking savings. So we don't want to talk to them about anything else. But when we actually asked the audience, yes, saving money was important, but actually the main things that the audience cared about were trying to add value to the business. They were trying to fix processes. They were trying to put in place preventative processes that helped improve the business. And the other thing was that they really cared about supplier relationships. So it wasn't just about saving money. It was actually about, in the jeopardy of that relationship, it was about improving the relationship. So saving money was almost secondary. So that was a big insight, and it actually led us down a route where we used this insight to kind of create new brand messaging, etc. But this is a case where, if we hadn't done this work, we'd have just ended up with a campaign that was purely based on saving money. So the types of things that we typically ask in that insights phase, in that insight survey, are, what are the challenges, both from a role perspective, but also the broader business? What are the priorities, the hot priorities right now? What do you need to get done? What are the trends and influences that are going on outside the business that's really putting pressure on you? And also things like, what's your current awareness and sort of perception of the brand or the product? Do you even know them at all? Have you used them before? That sort of thing. how are they currently solving the problem, and is there any barriers in the way to us replacing that old way of doing things? Then we tend to unpick the decision-making process, who's involved, how does it flow, what are the main criteria, really understand that. And then finally, things like media consumption. So, where do they go for information? Where do they, what influences do they learn from? With an eye on, a go-to-market plan that really fits that, where they go for information, what they're looking for. So that was the first example. The second example I want to take you through is a bit more in that creative selection phase. So this is another example for one of our clients, which is a big global recruiter called Kelly OCG. You may have heard of them. They're in the US as well as Europe. And this was a brand campaign, and it was really focusing. The main sort of piece of context that you probably need to be aware of is that Kelly OCG is a separate entity from Kelly Staffing, which is an enormous organization, and they generally had low awareness in Europe, and a misconception basically that Kelly OCG, which is more specialist services, was part of the bigger company. So we wanted to do something that really sets them apart with a unique identity and kind of reaffirms their presence as a quite a different business. So the core thought behind the campaign was really simple: honesty in recruitment, and it stemmed from an insight that we got, which was around a lot of recruiters overpromise and underdeliver. They'll say that they can fill X amount of roles, but they end up they can't, or they'll say someone's perfect for the role, but they're not. And Kelly were different. They had real honest conversations with their clients and never kind of gave any industry jargon. And it was a real true insight when we spoke to prospects and customers. So it really rang true. But when we got into the preference testing, so we tend to test this format of ad sets. So really kind of low quality, black and white sketches, and really we're just trying to test ideas, test words. In this case, the core thought was honesty. So we're exploring it in different ways. Things like the bottom right one, sure, I can fill 90 roles in 2 days. Like, how do you show the problem of other recruiters in this space? Or the one in the top right, which was, ditch the fluff, get rid of the jargon and all the nonsense from the industry. And that was through the lens of a very naked little bird, which was the one that actually won. It was the chosen concepts. And it was fascinating to sort of see people really identified with this, as it was quite a simple concept, but really stood out. And so there was lots of nice feedback, and you can see that the top comment, very clever. It's a really great message: plays to the strengths that customers are warm to, and no nonsense supplier. And that's what I meant by some of the customers will start to repeat back, the idea in their own words, and then we end up using words like no nonsense supplier in the actual ads. So you can sort of take the words that they use. But there was a few concerns with this one as well. One was a few people sort of talked about that it's quite cruel, and actually, shaving birds is not the nicest thing to do, and does it relate to animal cruelty and all of that sort of stuff. So and they also mentioned some of the wording in the text didn't really tie up as strongly as it could do with the concept. So there's lots of bits of feedback that came back, and it's as creative people, it's never nice to hear negative feedback, but you have to just embrace it, because the end product then it ends up being a lot better. And this is what the ad looked like in the end. So we changed the name sheep. It's much more humane to shave a sheep than it is to shave a bird. And we had a line that was see through the fluff. We had cut through the fluff. There was a whole sort of set of words that we used to kind of to communicate this point, and the message was much tighter. It was about providing honest guidance to clients, and it rolled out across out of home. We did lots of really interesting kind of formats. So we had an event. There was a huge event in the industry. We built this big stand. It was a conveyor belt, and it sort of showed a sheep going in on one end and coming out that had been shaved on the other. And then we gave out fluffy toys and things like that, and it worked really, really nicely. We had a lint roller, for taking fluff off your jackets, and we did door drops in all of the hotels around the event for the people attending. And we had lots of ads and videos and things like that. But the general message from the industry was, it really landed. It really resonated with customers, and even the competitors in the industry came up to the stand of that event and said, who's doing your marketing? Like it just stood out in a I said it before, but a sea of same within that industry. It really popped. And the employees really got hold of it as well. And they baked their own no-fluff cookies and did social posts and had office parties and stuff. And it really did land. And then the final one to jet through is more in that sphere of, you've got a big media budget and you need to make sure that the ad is right. And so it's putting that extra level of assessment and extra level of testing in. And this example I wanted to chat you through was for a global telco. So kind of merging of two businesses to create a new brand, which was called Console Connect. So generally low awareness and big growth ambitions. So this was, crossing events, out of home, digital, across America, across Europe, across Asia. So a big budget thing. So we had to get it right, basically. And the core thought behind this one, again, really simple idea, is ease of data movement. And this stems from, so Console Connect have a platform that essentially allows you to connect all of your data around the business. So you can move data from clouds to other clouds, or from on-premise to clouds. And one of the insights behind this was that generally is a really arduous process. Moving data from one cloud to the other incurs costs. You've got huge volumes and it takes a long time. So Console Connect basically make that whole process much easier through a single interface, and there's lots of benefits, but the core thought behind it was around complexity as the problem and ease as the solution. And the idea that kind of came through preference testing was this one. So it was focusing around, it was like a 70s theme essentially. We had this concept of smooth moving data, data that moves smoothly around the organization, and we tried to bring that to life through this metaphor of 70s. And this came through, as I say, the early rounds, and then we wanted to go back and make some tweaks and test it. But there was some feedback that came through for this. One is people didn't really understand the headline. We'd probably gone a little bit too clever with it. We were sort of trying to get that, that 70s language in there and show that you can move, data from cloud to anywhere you wanted. But people didn't really understand it. There was some concerns about the guy with the afro. People thought if that was a white person with an afro, then that was culturally, wrong. So there was although they liked the idea, there was a few things that we needed to tweak with it. So the final ad, or certainly next development, was this one. So we ended up sort of making the smooth moving data the main piece of this. And we gave it a bit more of a business slant. One of the other bits of feedback we got was it could be a mobile phone operated ad or something like that, talking about data. So we tried to make it more about business data. And then we really started to work up some of the visuals to give it a bit more of a pop and make it tie in with the Console Connect brand. And this is currently kind of being rolled out across, as I say, across the globe fairly shortly. And it's there's a whole campaign around it. This is just one ad variant. But it's really resonating with our audience, and it's because we went through that pain earlier on. So the way that we tend to review those deeper ads is by asking a few more questions, and we tend to focus on things like, what's your initial emotional reaction? What did you think when you first saw the ad? So emotional response, clarity, which is kind of where we fell over, I think, on some of the early ads. Is it really clear what we're trying to say and what the product is? Relevance, does it fit where you're at and what you need, and all that stuff around pain points. And persuasiveness, does it make you want to do something? Does it provoke a problem? Does it make you want to take an action? And just general improvements, which is often stuff that's harder to hear, but it is generally really good advice and inputs. And we don't take everything that the customer says, because ultimately we're supposed to be the ad experts, but it's really nice to hear what customers would do, what audiences would do in that situation. So we ask questions like this, what's your first reaction after seeing this ad? Please, can you describe the main message it's trying to communicate? How relevant it is to your business? So it's a much kind of deeper analysis. And that's it. That's all I wanted to run through with you today, really. Hopefully that was interesting, and it's always nice to see other people's creative and ads and stuff, isn't it? But yeah, thanks for listening to me. I'll pass back to Eric.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate going through some of the examples as well, because it is a lot of fun to see ads, especially ones that are live. I thought that I love that Kelly. Did you actually put like piles of wool, or was it just for the one particular shot that you took? It's amazing.
Yeah, we sort of mocked up a fake out of home. I don't know if
Ah,
you've
so
seen
good.
the yeah. There's an ad for Maybelline in the UK that sort of faked an ad out of home. We were trying to do something similar, putting it around London with big piles of fluff. Yeah,
Oh, that's so great. Well, yeah, again, I appreciate you taking through some of the examples as well, because the conceptual stuff, I think, lands with most people. But when you see it go into action, especially showing the scamps too, like when you and I chatted before about this, like, yeah, like I love the idea that let's just mock some stuff up and get it in front of the ICP or the audience,
mm,
potential audience, and see what they think of it. Not only do you get, like you said, the initial feedback, but they start to give you their language. And now you
yeah,
can borrow from that voice of the target customer, voice of the future customer, and embed that into your campaigns, because this is how they talk. I also really appreciated the example about their procurement folks, because that's critically important. I think I'm guilty of this. I make assumptions all the time, right? They're not interested in that. These people don't do that type of thing. That's not what their role is. And as it
yeah,
turns out, here's a group of salespeople that are responsible for knowing that target deeply. They're telling you, this is what we know about them. This is our persona. And when you talk to them, like, that's not what we care about at all. Yeah, that's part of our job description. But what we're trying to do here in this role is X, Y, and Z. And that's totally missed by the people who are out there trying to sell them products, because they haven't gone
exactly.
through that process
Yeah.
of talking to your target customer and really learning what makes them tick, why they're coming to work each day, which you folks are doing to make better marketing.
Exactly. That's a good point there, because I think sometimes there's a difference between personal motivations in your job and what you're trying to do, and the job description and what you're trying to do as a person in that company. And I think generally when people consume ads, they're being themselves, aren't they? They're not necessarily being their role. So trying to tap into that and essentially just trying to capture people's attention and really entertain them as much as we can is super key.
Yeah, I found in B2B, we become a little bit too reliant on this idea of the jobs to be done in some marketing. I see it a lot as I scroll the LinkedIn feed. Like, yes, that's what I do as a head of revenue. That's a box in my job description that you're right. You're pointing it out to me and kind of nailing it. And I also find that I sometimes don't even resonate with it, because you're not only stating the obvious, but that's like sometimes it's a pain for me. Like, yeah, I do have to get there, but that's not what I want to be doing. I want to be these other things that I'm aspiring to in my role. Like you said, the
Mm,
personal motivation, and those types of ads really resonate with me deeply. Okay, are you trying to
yeah,
get from here to there to nirvana? Yes, I am. That's actually what I'm aiming for. But there's a bunch of hurdles in the way that just called my job that I've got to do, that are boxes that have to be checked. So I love that you've gone out there. Sharon made a nice comment here. It's analogous to buying your spouse a birthday gift. Shows whether you know them or not. Oh my goodness, I'm guilty of that one with my spouse. That's for sure. So I'd love to, and speaking of the chat, I'd love to invite you to share any Q&A that you've got for Chris while we're here, if you've got some questions. Otherwise, we can let you folks go early. We don't want to sit here and drag on. Chris gave us a really succinct presentation, which we will send out to you. But if you've got some questions for us while we're here, we'll give you a minute to put them into the chat while I ponder what I'm going to buy my spouse for her birthday next year. Actually, Christmas is coming, so I've got to think about getting that taken care of, Sharon. Any thoughts? Questions? Q&A? If not, don't worry, because I'm happy to. Oh, there's a question here. I'm happy to also pass questions to Chris, or you can add him on LinkedIn and just pop into his DMs as well. I know he's always open to that type of thing. The question here is, when socializing. Oh, I got to go to click over to it. It's a good question from Brian. When socializing work with your senior clients, one stakeholder's point of view can sometimes unfairly steer the creative. We've all been there. How many people do you normally want to reach to understand whether your ideas work?
yeah, it's a really good point, and it speaks. We see that all the time. Is that you get very creatives, very emotional in the process. People in the organization want to have a say in that, and everyone has different, subjective, objective opinions on something, and the loudest in the room can sometimes sway things. When we typically do this, we try and do. It does depend on the size of the campaign and things, but we try to do at least 40 people, and it's less. I think really we're less looking at it from a quantitative standpoint. if you wanted something to be really statistically viable, you'd look at sort of 250. What we're looking for really is, yes, which one do they prefer, but much more on the qual side. You know, what do they like about the ads? What don't they like about the ads? I mean, how would they improve them? And using it as a much more of a learning process rather than just which one do you like? Because, you know, sometimes asking which one do you like isn't the one that they'll actually engage with when they're in market. So that qualitative side of it is much more interesting to us. You know, if lots of people are saying, you know, we just don't get it, or if lots of people are saying, I love it because of this reason, but that reason's the wrong reason, then that sort of insight is much more interesting to us than just the hard fact, you know, of this one won. If that makes sense.
Awesome. That makes sense to me. I have a question for you as well. So I'm curious in, you know, you folks operate as a business. I know there's some folks who are not only solopreneurs, but also working their own agencies that they've got here who are on the chat right now. When do you bring these types of insights into the process? Is this something that you bring in at the pitch level where you say, you know what, we're trying to close Kelly OCG's example. We're trying to close Kelly. Let's go and get some pre-work done to fuel the pitch. Or do you kind of bring it in once you get the creative process started to get the initial, you know, scamp work, the initial voice of the customer, et cetera? How do you insert the insights in when you begin work with the client?
Yeah, we just build this in right from the outset into our proposal, and we say, look, this is how we work. This is how we work. We know this is the best way to work because it'll get more creative ideas through the business. And sometimes our own clients, you know, within marketing, they want to do bold stuff, but they're worried about what everyone else in the business will think and stuff like that. And if they've got some, you know, some evidence that says that, look, the audience like it, it doesn't matter what you think, even the CEO, you know, it doesn't matter what the CEO thinks, it's what the audience thinks. So that when we just pitch it, yeah, as part of this is our standard way of doing things, and build it into our costs, and we've never had any problems really. We certainly know that the second campaigns with the clients, they make sure it's in there. So they do value, you know, the second time we speak to them, they say, oh, you are going to test it, aren't you? And we'll say, yeah, definitely. So the first sell isn't that difficult if you pitch it in the right way. And then the second sell is them usually asking us to make sure it's in there. So yeah, it's quite easy really, as long as you just say, this is the way we do it.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I've actually, in chatting with our customers, I've heard that switch flip moment as well, where the champion for one of our customers will be like, I get Wynter. I know exactly how it works. Maybe they use a different company or they just have bought into the idea. And then they have to go and win some budget or some approval to do it. And then they do a Wynter test. We're going to test our homepage and test our messaging and get, you know, like you said, 45 or 50 senior leadership on our target customers to come and give us all this insight. The next time they need to run that, much easier. They've shared that around internally. Wow, there's been 50 CEOs gave you, you know, some advice on our homepage and how to design it properly and what they prefer and don't prefer about it. My goodness, please go and get that for all of our product pages. So it's, yeah, that sometimes that moment of adopting ICP insights or adopting target customer insights sounds like conceptual in the very beginning, but once you actually see it in practice, like, holy smokes, it's much more important than I thought to gather this information. So appreciate that. Christina had a question here. She mentioned interesting how much culture plays a role in your campaign. So like you mentioned the cultural appropriation for the disco inspired campaign with the folks with the Afro, cruelty of shaving a bird. Is there a point of no return in a campaign where you have it so far developed that you can't take certain feedback into consideration? So what type of feedback do you always try to implement? So it's kind of a two-part question. So have you ever reached that point where you're like, can't go any further, we've got to go or not go? And then what type of feedback do you always try and get in?
It's a good question. I think every bit of feedback has to be taken in the broader context. You know, the audience feedback is part of the puzzle. And I think, you know, if there's a really important issue, then there's lots of people that raise it, then we usually address it. If there's a couple of people that raise it as a concern, but actually the vast majority of people, plus the client, plus, you know, as marketers, we know it's right, we'll take a judgment on it. I think we've had, for example, people, we've asked them, you know, what do you think? And they say, oh, can you make it more B2B? We need, you know, this is too exciting for a B2B campaign. And obviously we're not going to make something boring because someone's asked for it, because the reality is that's not what, you know, if they're scrolling LinkedIn, they're not going to be attracted to a boring ad. So there is an element of judgment in this. So it's about looking at what you can learn. But ultimately, as marketers, we need to be able to make the call on what good looks like. So it's an element of input rather than, and to the point of no return. I think the good thing about doing those sketches is that any issues usually pop up really early on before you've really done any work. You've got a few quite ugly sketches, but actually you've only spent a few days. Whereas, if you're going to kind of perfect something and polish it perfectly and then test it, then you've done weeks of work and you risk just throwing it away. So early testing, even if it's just, you don't even have to sketch anything up. You can just do a description. You can just say, look, we've got this idea. The idea is this with this and this. Can you picture it? And test that. You don't need a visual, and then you'll learn quite quickly what's good and bad.
Yeah, for those of you who are on the chat who don't necessarily do marketing campaigns, maybe you test other things with Wynter. I've even seen some of our largest customers do exactly that. So they'll just take a mock-up, like they'll take a screenshot of their menu bar from a landing page and just put it into a doc, and then start wireframing below using tools like Balsamic or Excalidraw or whatever. They'll box here, box there. This is going to be a picture. They'll paste something in. Like it looks it looks pretty handmade. But then they just go and they run a survey against it and start asking some questions, because to your point, like why go too far down the road? There's a big investment in your work and time and energy to make a final creative output that's going to stick. If you can just mock those mock-ups up quickly, you get multiple versions of them in front of the target customer very quickly, right? You know what's not going to land, and you just go. For a analogy, the way that we used to do this in agency work that I've done in the past was we didn't go through this process. What we did instead was we just took any output that came from the creative team and just threw it up into LinkedIn and we let the algorithm decide for us. And this is a very common practice that I've heard from a lot of marketers, where they'll just take as much creative as possible and just dump it in. And then they'll look at things like, what's the click-through rate? What was the engagement rate on those ads? And they'll say, well, this ad's a winner because the algorithm surfaced it more and there was more clicks on it. Where I would push back on that, largely because of seeing your process and hearing you, is that there is a lasting impression that is left every time your target audience sees advertising creative that comes from your brand. And if your process is just spaghetti, 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 and rely on the algorithm to sort it out for you, you will see numbers, but you're not going to get that qualitative. How do you feel about that? How does that make you tick? If you folks had done this for your customer and you went with the shaved bird and the afro ad and just threw it up into LinkedIn to see what happens, that's a challenge, right? You're not, being culturally sensitive. You're, the feet with the laptop you mentioned as well. That's not going to just clue into somebody. You're not going to know that cultural sensitivity issue. And if your process is we'll just throw it in there and let the algorithm decide for us, damage can result that you had no intention of causing. And you might not ever hear about it either. That might not ever be surfaced to your brand through comments or whatnot. So really important way that you approach this that I personally took a lot out of when I first, talked to you and saw your approach, and I'm glad you came here. I have one more question for you. It looks like from Brian. So you mentioned, actually there might be two questions here. I think Kieran's was first. How often do you carry out this research? Yeah, so let's go with Kieran's first. Is there a more streamlined way for more always-on advertising that wouldn't be at the scale of a large campaign? This leads well into what I was just mentioning, right? The rapid response to creative. So you may not have the time and resources to carry out this type of research on a regular basis. So I think it's, again, two parts. So how often do you carry this out on behalf of your clients? And can you envision a streamlined way to get this done where it's more of a faster?
So I'd say some of these campaigns are like kind of yearly campaigns. So they'll invest a good amount of budget to have a campaign idea or platform that runs for a year or so. So that's why we take a lot of time to make sure it's right, because it's going to be market for a long, long time. With more of the sort of always on stuff, I'd say you're always going to, whatever's out there is always going to be talking about a particular message or handful of messages. So in that case, I would be thinking about testing the underlying messages rather than necessarily the ads. If you want your brand to be known for, I don't know, efficiency and innovation or whatever it might be, I'd be making sure that whatever ads you come up with align to those things that the customers agree with. So test your underlying messaging framework instead of testing your ads, and then you'll know what are the key things that you need to be saying in the market, and therefore all of the always on ads that you got, which might just be bits of content or whatever it might be, will always, at least the message is always going to be right regardless of what's in the ad.
Awesome. And then that question I mentioned from Brian as well, when socializing your work, oh, I think we already covered this one.
Yeah.
One stakeholder's point of view. Yeah, we did. Okay, great. So thank you for your question, Brian, and from Kieran as well. If there's any other questions, chat, you can drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we will let you get on with your day. Thank you again, Chris, for sharing your time and expertise with us. I know I learned a lot. For those of you here, we'll obviously send you out a recording of this, and we'll have some clips and stuff sent to LinkedIn, so you'll see it in your inbox shortly. Good luck with the rest of the year, and wishing you happy holidays to all of you in the chat, and you, Chris, as well.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Thanks to everybody for listening.
All right. Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.
Ciao.